killing and extermination of Jews, Poles, and other prisoners in the West has been known and publicized since the killing began in 1941. The question that remains very hard to answer is why nobody did anything to save the Jews. It was not only Germans or French who remained silent while numerous people were being killed, but the whole of Europe. It is not true that the information came very late or that even Germans were unaware of what was happening inside the concentration camps. Churchill himself spoke openly about the Nazis' policy of mass murder, and the Polish government in exile in London had informed the Allied governments in May 1941 about the existence of Auschwitz for Poles and about the executions that had taken place there. In July 1942, the Polish Fortnightly Review, published in London, printed a list of 22 camps, including Auschwitz, where Nazi atrocities were occurring. On 17 December, Antonio Eden, the British Foreign Secretary, read a statement to Parliament condemning Nazi atrocities, including the murder of Jews. After he finished, MPs stood for a minute's silence. A message sent by the Polish resistance in March 1943 also mentioned Auschwitz as one of the places where Jews were being killed. And on 1 June that year, the London Times published an article about the Nazi brutality to Jews at Auschwitz. The question is not about ignorance of what was happening in Germany and elsewhere in Nazi ruled Europe, as some scholars suggest to explain how all this occurred. Even knowing that such atrocities were being committed against the Jewish population, there was still the gradual transportation of Jews. First, the tragic story of Austrian Jews, then those from Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and most tragically, the French Jews and children who were sent to be killed. Political leaders did not fear what justice might say about their actions, they only fear the powerful. Following this, many other parts of Europe, including Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and more, became involved. In the spring of 1941, Hungarians joined Hitler in his invasion of Yugoslavia and then in June helped him achieve victory against the Soviet Union. But the attempt ultimately failed and the war prolonged. In 1943, the Red Army smashed through Hungary, killing about 150,000 troops. This also helps explain why Hungary changed its position as the winning side shifted. Secret talks were held during 1943 with the Western Allies, and Hungary agreed to change sides. Hungarians long played a very sophisticated game, balancing between both the West and the Nazis. These descriptions reveal a great deal about human nature, how the fear of the powerful can blind us to the truth. There is a deep instinct for self preservation in many of us, where sometimes we do wrong simply to protect ourselves and assure nothing bad happens to us. But in the long run, these actions, which are ultimately not virtuous, end up making our lives much more difficult. The question of why nobody did anything to protect those sent to concentration camps remain painfully difficult to comprehend. One of the hardest stories to believe is that of the children from France who were left without their parents as they were sent to death camps and lost their lives. As the war dragged on and the Nazis found themselves weakened, they began facing increasing difficulties in carrying out the final solution. As Lawrence Rees explains, the Bulgarian authorities had earlier handed over 11,000 Jews from occupied Thrace and Macedonia, who were then murdered in Treblinka. However, protests erupted in 1943 against plans to deport Jews from Bulgaria itself. Similarly, the Romanian leader, despite having taken part in the destruction of Jewish communities, later refused to send the remaining Jews population of Romania to the gas chambers of Belzec. In Italy, too, although Mussolini had implemented various anti Semitic measures, He had so far refused to hand over Italian Jews. Many allies of the Nazis were no longer convinced that they were supporting the winning side. They had assisted the Nazis in persecuting Jews when it served their own interests. Now that is no longer did, they began to distance themselves from the entire policy. For the most part, their change of heart was motivated less by moral awakening and more by cynical pragmatism. This whole picture, which is only briefly touched upon here, though much more remains to be said, reveals how such a corrupted political standard has served our people. It sometimes leaves us confused when reading these parts of our history, causing us to question our moral standards, what they truly were, and how they functioned. Is morality really something we choose, or is it something we find ourselves present in, compelled to act within? And when we do wrong, we deny seeing that we are doing something wrong. This denial can emerge from various factors, one of which is the fear of powerful. As we have seen with the many examples from Europe, Denmark stands out as a remarkable example of moral resistance. Though some argue that the conditions for the Danes were different and that the Nazis were not as brutal there as in other European countries, there was still a moral standard that they represented to the world. Germany occupied Denmark on 9th April 1940. The story of how the Danes saved their Jews is not only inspiring and intriguing, but also layered with complexities that at first glance might seem absent. So, the initial question at the center of today's discussion: what takes so long for our political institutions to act? And why do people living under a political regime sometimes support them even as atrocities unfold? Why does realization come so late? It seems that our systems of governance often take a long time to respond to rational exploitation or evil power. Powers they recognize as evil but tolerate because staying in power appears more appealing. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for more and have a great day.